No matter who you are or what you do, you have a list of do's and don'ts and whatever you do. Today on Woodworking with Wes, I'm going to share with you 6 things that are on my do not list. Let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the lumber that I buy when I go to get my lumber. I always make sure that I get good stock. Let me show you this piece. I saved this as a bad example. I put it down here on my table, and it's just so warped, and it's even warped that way too. Now, part of the reason that I always make sure that I get good lumber is because the project that you build, if you start with bad wood, you end up with a project that's not as good as it should be. Also, if you get a piece of wood that is warped or bent or anything like that, sometimes it's a little unsafe to work with. And maybe you can't even get it to do the things that it needs to do because it's so bad. Let me show you what I do when I go to the lumber yard. The first thing I do is I take a look at my board and I sight down it to see how straight it is. Then I lay it over like this and look down the top of it to see how flat it is. And that tells me whether or not that's a piece of wood that I'm interested in buying. One of the first things that I was taught as a young apprentice was to cut off the mill end. Now, let me show you what a mill end is. If I were cutting this board, this is a board that has just been freshly cut and it has a nice, clean, smooth, flat. This is the mill end. What it means by a mill end is this is the way it comes from the sawmill. Or if you're buying a plywood piece, this is the way that it comes from the mill that produces the plywood. You can see the printing along the edge, and if you look close, it's kind of chattered a little bit from moving it around and stacking and everything like that. It's just kind of a rough edge. It's not the edge that you want to work with when you get started. You want to have a clean, smooth, flat edge on all of the wood that you work with. Never use a mill edge. I always cut off all of my mill edges. And it was, like I say, it was one of the first things that I got taught as a young apprentice cabinet maker. Make sure you cut off that mill edge and start with a good, clean surface when you're cutting your wood, when you're putting your project together. Anything that you're doing, you want to start with a good, clean piece of wood, a good, clean edge on your wood. The next is, we've all seen examples of bad plywood. I want to talk to you about the plywood, the sheet goods that I use when I build projects. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your plywood, this is an example of 1/2-inch Baltic birch that I use for my drawers. It's nice, tight, there's no voids, there's no gaps, and it's all nice and uniform. This is a piece of oak plywood that I use in my kitchen work, and you can see, again, no voids, no gaps. The veneer is smooth on both sides. On both of these pieces, whatever the finished wood is on top, it's nice and smooth because the plywood in the center is nice and smooth. You always want to make sure that the sheet goods that you use, regardless of what it is a good quality sheet good. A plywood, even an MDF core. You want to make sure that you buy wood that is appropriate for the project you're doing, but buy the quality that will give you the end result in your project that you're looking for. Cheap plywood, cheap project, bad results. Remember that. I never ever buy the cheap stuff. The next thing I don't do is I don't use dull cutting tools. I have some router bits here. These are some saw blades that I use for different work that I do. When they start to get dull, they don't cut properly. They leave jagged edges or uneven cuts. And you just want to make sure that you have good sharp tools. A router bit will tell you when it's not sharp anymore. It begins to burn. Now, if you get a little burn on one little part of it, you can sand that out. But when it burns the whole way, you're ready to have it sharpened. Same with my saw cuts. When I'm cutting and I begin to see a burn all the way along my cut, I know that my saw blade needs to go to the sharpening shop. In fact, what I just got through doing is send off this blade to the sharpening shop, but I also bought an additional one for a backup so that I can change out my blades and keep them sharp. I thought I'd like to add in just about how much it would cost and where you get your blades sharpened. Now, Typically, you could look online or look in your local area and see if there's a place that does saw blade sharpening. I got a reference from the other cabinet shops that were in my area to find one that was really good, that was recommended. Just to give you an idea, a new blade would cost about 4 times as much as it costs to have your old one sharpened. And if you buy a good quality blade, you can have it sharpened many times, and it lasts a long time that way. But I always like to have a backup to change out. Just keep that in mind. Good sharp blades makes for good cuts and a good project when you get all done. Check around, make sure you got a good place to get your blades sharpened so that you can keep your tools ready to go. As I'm getting ready to do my woodwork, one of the things that's part of woodworking is gluing things up. So I never do a glue up without a dry fit. I'm going to show you a door that I'm getting ready to glue up and show you how a dry fit helps you make sure everything's correct. I have a raised panel door that I'm gluing together, stiles, rails, and panel, ready to go. What I do when I do a dry fit is I don't use any glue yet. I put the pieces where they go. There's my stile or my rail at the end. I'm going to turn it like this so you can see it better. Then I put my panel in. My other rail piece, make sure that it would fit flush with the end. Now, one of the things that I will just add that we won't be doing is, because this is a solid wood panel, there'll be space balls involved, but let's just not worry about that right now. We're just doing the dry fit. And then I make sure that it fits like that. That goes together. Take my rubber hammer and give it a little smack. And then I always put a clamp on it because I'm going to be clamping my doors. I want to make sure that when I put a clamp on my door or whatever I'm gluing up, that the clamp pulls it together the way I'm wanting it to be when I have the glue on it. So you can see my dry fit shows that my joints are tight, my ends are even, my panel's where it's supposed to be. I now am ready to glue this door together because my dry fit was correct. Always do a dry fit whenever you do a glue up, no matter what it is. If it's just even a panel, do a dry fit. Make sure your joints come together properly. Make sure the wood is going to look like what you're trying to end up with before you put the glue on. Once you put the glue on, you're ready to make that permanent. Make sure before you do that your dry fit is correct. Another thing that I never do is I never cut short my sanding process. Whether you are doing a project that is a paint grade finish or a stain and lacquer finish, sanding is the first step to a great finish. And so I always make sure, no matter what kind of sander I'm using, I always make sure that I never skip a step. I start with 80 grit sandpaper. That takes off all of the real rough finish on my wood. Then I go to 100 grit, smooth it up a little bit more, off to 120 grit to make everything fine. And then if I'm doing any routing or anything like that, I always route after my 120 grit. Make sure that everything is look nice and clean and smooth the way it wants to be. Then I finish off with 150 grit. Now, most of my projects that I do, 150 is my final sand, and I give a nice smooth sand all the way across, making sure that all of the edges are sanded, all around the corners and the crevices and everything like that is all sanded properly. Some woods, depending upon the wood that you're using, you might want to even go a higher grit than 150. 150 is what I use for most of my kitchen and furniture work. But never ever skip the sanding process. Don't cut short, don't cheat, go for the excellent finish. Always remember your do's and don'ts. Skip the don'ts, do the do's. and we'll see you next time on Woodworking with Wes.